Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We'll just give another moment for people to come through from the waiting room. So just hold tight for a minute or two as people join in. Beautiful people coming in. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to wait another minute or two as people join into the call. Okay. Thank you all. Beautiful. Okay, we might kick off, and as the final few people join in, then we'll welcome, they can join after we've kind of done some of the housekeeping. So a few quick notes before we begin tonight. Tonight's session is being recorded, and we'll share it through afterwards with everybody who registered if you want to pass it on to friends and family. As you can probably tell, you're all muted without cameras, but you should have access to the Q&A box throughout. So please pop in any questions as they come to you. If you have follow-up questions from the conversation that Noah and I have, please do submit them. And then in the second half of the session tonight, we will get through basically as many of them as we can and try and combine them where there are sort of similar themes overlapping. So before we jump in, I just wanted to acknowledge country. Because we're gathering online tonight, we're all joining from many different lands. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all of the lands that we're on tonight. I'm on the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. As a very quick introduction, I'm sure most of you know, but for those of you who are new to us, the New Israel Fund works to strengthen democracy, advance equality, and build a shared society for all who call Israel home. And we do that by funding and partnering with civil society organizations who work on the ground, including activists, lawyers, and community leaders who do the day-to-day work of protecting rights and democratic life for all Israelis and Palestinians. Here in Australia, our organisation, the New Israel Fund Australia, is the local home for that work. So we connect our community here to those organisations through fundraising, online information sessions like tonight, in-person speaker tours, young adult programs, news updates, and more. And for those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Elisheva Madar, and I'm the Policy and Impact Manager here at NIF. That means I manage all of our policy, engagement, and education programs for the Australian team, which means my work sits at a lot of the intersection of what we'll be talking about tonight, which is what's happening in Israel electorally, and then conversations and how they kind of communicating that to an Australian audience. So I'm really honoured to be moderating this conversation tonight. Tonight is the second webinar in our series KOLOT. KOLOT means voices in Hebrew. And with Israel heading into its first election since October 7th and the war in Gaza, we wanted to bring you voices of people who are closest to the ground, experts, Israelis and Palestinians, sharing what it is taking to uphold democracy and build a just shared future for all. We began a couple of weeks ago, for those of you who were able to attend, with a session on safeguarding civil rights and democracy. And over the next few weeks, we'll continue. This is the second in a 5-part series. So we have sessions about online misinformation, Arab-Jewish partnership in the Negev, mobilizing the Palestinian vote, and more. And we'd love for you guys to join for as many or as few of those sessions as sound interesting. The details are all on our website, and they'll be in the follow-up email you get. So I just wanted to say a quick word about why NIF is running this series, other than the fact that it's something that we personally find very interesting. As you should all know, NIF doesn't back any particular political party or candidate or bloc in the upcoming elections. It's not our role, and it's not what tonight or this series are about. We're not here to tell Israelis how they should be voting. But what we care about and what this series is about is the health of the democratic process itself in Israel. And that includes ensuring that elections are free and fair, that people's rights are protected throughout it, and that the institutions and freedoms upon which Israeli democracy relies come through this election intact. So over this series, you'll hear from voices and organizations who are doing this work. Our topic tonight is human rights issues at stake in the upcoming elections. And we're incredibly lucky and honored to have an expert lawyer, rabbi, and activist, Noa Sattath, join us. Noa is the executive director of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, or ACRI. So be aware of that acronym. I'm sure it'll pop up. ACRI is a long-standing partner and recipient of NIF funding. And ACRI is Israel's oldest and most influential human rights organization. It was founded back in the 70s. And it's one of the only organizations in Israel that works across the full spectrum of civil and human rights issues. I won't say too much more because Noa will provide a much better and deeper understanding of ACRI's work and what they care about and what's at stake in this upcoming election. But to give you all just a quick bio on Noa, Noa has spent her career at the front line of Israel's social action struggles. At ACRI, she led the Israel Religious Action Center and drove its work on the relationship between religion and state inside of Israel, on gender equality and the fight against racism. Noa has been a partner in a lot of leading social justice struggles, especially the struggle against the exclusion of women and working to prevent the election of openly racist candidates who are running for Knesset. She also led the Jerusalem's Open House for Pride and Tolerance, where she helped bring about the city's first ever Pride March, which is an incredible achievement to be able to put on your CV, Noa, and Meet, which builds shared relationships and leadership between young Israelis and Palestinians. And she's also an ordained Reform Rabbi. Noa is joining us tonight from Israel, and we're so grateful for her time. So thank you so much, Noa, for taking the time to speak with Australian supporters of NIF, especially at a time that's so pivotal and intense in Israel.
Thank you, Elisheva, and thank you for everybody who joined us tonight, and for the NIF Australia staff that helped make this webinar happen, and for everybody who supports NIF in Australia. NIF has been such a key player in Israel, and in my life, I've spent like 25 years working for NIF organizations, so I'm deeply, deeply grateful for all the partnership here.
Thanks so much, Noa. So the first question is, can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and how you came to work in this field? And then just a sort of general overview about ACRI and the work that they do.
Sure. So I was born here in Jerusalem to a really secular, average Israeli family. And my path was really paved by NIF organization. So I started as a teen and young adult in the Jerusalem Open House in its very, very early years, where NIF was the only supporter of the Jerusalem Open House. And because it was a very small and growing organization, I got to really be part of the organization's leadership in the years where we were the only LGBT organization in town. So I got to to work with Palestinian lesbians and ultra-Orthodox gay men in every sector of Jerusalem society that you could imagine, and learn a lot about Jerusalem and Israel through that lens. And when I left there, I wanted to look at social justice issues from a broader perspective than the LGBT perspective. So I joined an organization called Meet, which was founded in MIT in Boston, which was an extracurricular program for outstanding high school students from Israel and the West Bank. And then I got to learn a lot about the occupation and the challenges around it, and the challenges around breaking the barriers between the peoples. And one of the major challenges there, or one of the major roles I had in the organization, was breaking the reluctance of the Israeli teens to engage with the Palestinian teens. It was a long program, so we had a lot of time to work on it. Meet, like many encounter programs, is built in favor of the Israelis. The Palestinians have to cross checkpoints in order to get there. We spoke in English, but everybody around us spoke in Hebrew, which was very challenging for the Palestinians. And specifically, it was a computer science-based program. And the Israeli education system is completely focused on computer science preparation, and the Palestinian education system does none of that. So there were also major academic advantages in favor of the Israelis. And despite that, they were petrified. And the more I looked into it, and I brought consultants and I did workshops and I spoke to students, the more it became apparent to me that the Palestinian students came with a really strong sense of self and a really strong narrative, both religiously and nationally. And the Palestinian students and the Israeli students who all came from really excellent secular high schools couldn't articulate anything about their identity that didn't have to do with the Holocaust. And that has led me to an understanding that has really deepened since, that the void in progressive Jewish identity in Israel doesn't only impact really important questions like marriage and conversion and the Kotel, but it also has a profound impact on how we see ourselves and how we see the other and how we think about justice. Because if we're insecure in who we are, it makes us extremely vulnerable to be encountering anybody else. And that's what led me to rabbinic school and to many years of working for the Reform movement in Israel, and trying to think about how we build a progressive liberal identity in Israel. And working on issues of freedom of religion and women's rights and LGBT rights and anti-racism work. And all of that prepared me for the job I took almost 5 years ago, which is the head of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, which is an organization that has a wide mandate of work on all civil and human rights issues in Israel. And as Elisheva said, we're the oldest and largest human rights organization working on all issues, both inside Israel with issues of police brutality, freedom of expression, equality for Arab society within Israel, and human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, which is a big undertaking in every period, and specifically in this one.
Thank you so much, Noa. Oh.
Just to say that ACRI's main strength is legal work. We do about 45 Supreme Court cases a year on all of our issues. And we have an expertise in building these cases and trying to represent the interests of human rights in Israel.
Thank you so much. So, I mean, the first thing to say is, well, what an incredible career, Noa. You're tackling questions, I think, that we talk all the time about here in Australia, actually, questions of Jewish identity that are separate to the Holocaust and to suffering. How do we create a Jewish identity that's from a position of hope and love and connection to our Jewishness, that isn't just about anti-Semitism and struggle and those, exactly, like what does it mean to build a future Jewish community that people want to join, that young people feel empowered and impassioned to join. So as you've said, ACRI kind of covers a huge array of topics, particularly in the context of the upcoming elections. What do you feel have been the most urgent issues maybe in the last few months, and that you see that ACRI is now planning on focusing on in kind of the next 3-6 months in relation to the election, but also more broadly?
So just to say that this has been the challenges and the trial of this, that we as human rights activists and certainly people on the ground here have suffered because of this government were not measured, that we were never able to even imagine, specifically during the war with Gaza. And we're trying to now both think about the strategies for the next few months, and also more broadly about this next government. And I think that and that is something that has been very much a characteristic of this entire government, where we're talking about one reality in Israel that is extremely urgent, and another reality in the West Bank or in the occupied territories that include Gaza, which is catastrophic. So I'll start with the West Bank and then I'll move to Israel, and I think we'll just do this dance throughout the conversation. In the West Bank, our main effort is to help people stay on the ground for the months that it will take until hopefully the government will be changed. And we have to remember that we have a little over 3 months a little less than 3 months until the elections, but then until the government is established and gets into power, that's a few more months, which we anticipate to be very, very tumultuous in the West Bank. And we're trying to do everything we can to support protective presence. We have a big project with NIF about supporting and documenting protective presence, which allows us to, for the first time, really see an overview of what different protective presence groups in the West Bank are seeing, trying to address the urgent needs of the people there to allow as many people to stay on the ground in their lands until after the elections. We are hopeful that the next government will not be tolerant to settler violence and will be able to resolve some of the issues around violence. And so we are really focusing on people staying. Once people leave, returning is very, very difficult. It's a mission that we're committed to, but it's a whole different game than if they're able to stay. So, for example, through our new project with NIF on the documentation of activists who do protective presence, we have found that the strategy of settler violence in the past few weeks, as it's getting insanely hot here, is to try and go after the water resources of the communities in the West Bank. So we're trying to provide legal mechanisms to restore water to these communities. So these are the issues that we are dealing with at the moment in the West Bank. We also have some longer term, like next government thoughts on crucial issues in the West Bank, and I can go into that later. Inside Israel, we are looking at the next elections and the constant worry that the government will try to change the laws of the elections. It does not seem likely right now, but we are very prepared for any situation. One of the worries, and I know that you have a webinar on that coming up, and so I'm guessing NIF shares our concern, is that if Netanyahu continues to look at these current polls that are very, very bad for him and sees that he does not have an opportunity for a war outside of Israel, which he is constantly trying to reignite, that he will try and create unrest in the Negev. That's a huge area of concern for us, and we are investing a lot in being connected with the communities on the ground, so that if there's any escalation, we can be partners to a de-escalation, which we're hoping will be swift. So these are like our focus both inside and outside of Israel ahead of the elections.
Okay, thank you so much, Noa. I mean, you've been talking about how right now, as you said, your kind of work is focused on a holding pattern, so keeping people on the land in the West Bank, preparing in the occasion in which there's attempts for election fraud or election interference. So in a world in which an alternative government is formed after the election, what are the first issues that you, like ACRI, would be pushing for them to tackle? And how likely do you think it is that you would have potentially a stronger partner or a more sympathetic partner in the Knesset than you've had in the last few decades?
Okay, so I think it's very likely that we will have a better Knesset than we do now, where it's really very difficult and very, very few members of Knesset who are trying to cover the vast array of human rights infringements that this government has. So certainly we're hoping to have a better partners in the Knesset after the next elections. I think that we're going to be in a very delicate dance, because if there is a different government after the elections, we're definitely not going to be eager for a new extreme right-wing government to return. I think it's likely that a government that will be a kind of a change government, which will have many members of the current opposition, will be a fragile government, and that both liberal forces outside of Israel and liberal forces inside Israel will want it to succeed, will desperately want it to succeed and survive. And on the other hand, there are many burning issues that without some pressure, it feels unlikely that the next government will tackle. So let's start with what we think that it is likely that the next government will tackle. We definitely think that the next government will undo all the judicial overhaul legislation that this government has done. They will undo it. I think it's likely that they will remove many of the threats on the media, which is phenomenal. And I think that they will, even without being pushed very hard by civil society, will try and tackle the issues of settler violence. And all of that is very good news, but it's not enough. The issues that we are looking at, where we're going to be eager to push the government, are the reversal of the death law bill, which is the death penalty law is any death penalty law at this time is anti-human rights and very shocking, but the language of the death penalty law that has passed is specifically racist. We have a hearing in the Supreme Court in January 2027 in our petition against the death penalty law, but we are eager to have that law removed by the government. I think that with enough pressure from the public and from other countries, the Knesset may do it on their own without the judicial struggle involved.
Just sorry to interrupt, Noah, but for those, some of our audience might not have heard much about the death penalty bill. Do you mind just giving a 2-sentence?
Sure.
The death penalty bill was, who proposed it, when it was passed?
Yes. So Israel has a very limited death penalty on the books since its founding. Israel's only used the death penalty twice, once in 1948 with a wrong conviction. So the person who was executed was later vindicated. And in the 1970s during the Eichmann trial, in the law that allows for death penalty for Nazi perpetrators. And in the past, I'm gonna go deep into this because I think it's interesting, and Elisheva, stop me if it's getting too detailed. But I think it's a very interesting example of how the judicial overhaul or how the anti-democratic processes have been going. In the past 20 years, in every Knesset session, the extreme right wing was proposing a death penalty in different languages, reinstating death penalty for terrorism perpetrators. And every single time in the past 20 years, this proposal didn't even get a serious discussion because the Shin Bet, the Israeli Secret Security Service, said that it would detract from the security of Israelis, that if there was a death penalty hanging over perpetrators of terrorism, that would increase martyrdom, it would increase the likelihood of copycat attacks, and that it would detract from people's security. We, of course, oppose the law because death penalty is immoral and anti-human rights, but the Shin Bet was also opposing it. Last year, Netanyahu was able to take over that position and nominate, rather than professionals from within the organization, nominate somebody who promised loyalty to him. And that head of the Shin Bet reversed the position of the organization against the professional advice of his subordinates, and basically allowed for this hearing to develop and to move through. And we at ACRI spent months listening to debates over the width of the rope and the length of the rope. And we heard we saw how this death penalty, which the hearings that were brought about after the ceasefire in Gaza were basically a venue for the violence and the language of violence and revenge that was very present during the war. And the deliberation over the death penalty were, included, cakes with nooses on them and champagne celebrations of this law, which basically means that only Arabs will be able to be executed. It's only for people who commit a nationalistic murder, which was aimed against the Jewish nature of the state. Mainly, so that means that it targets both Palestinians in the occupied territories and Palestinian citizens inside Israel. We have a very clear appeal against it, and we hope that the court will take that into account, but we're also hoping that the next government will take action against this law. One more note is that the law is not retroactive, so it won't be relevant to people who were perpetrators of October 7th, which the government was lying to the public about as the legislation proceeded. So this is a very concerning law to us, both because of the implications and also because if violence and injustice are an official part of the justice system, that undermines the entire concept. So we're very, very concerned about this law, and we're hoping that to push the next government to reverse it. The second area that we are going to be pushing the government, and we're not sure that the government will want to take that action, is the issue of the illegal outposts. So during this government, there were 130 outposts that were created. An outpost is like maybe few families, could be 10 people, with goats that take over a strategically located hill and all of the area around it. So the outposts that we're creating during the last 3 years of this government have basically taken more land from Area C than the entire settlement establishment that was before these 3 years, twice. I'm not sure that you understand the amount of land that has been taken over by these outposts during these last 3 years, and they're all illegal. So removing them is completely possible, and it depends on the motivation of the government. And we have not appealed on this until now because it was clear that it will not have an impact. But now we are doing the first steps toward litigation so that we can file an appeal after the elections to remove the outposts, both through the funding mechanisms and through other mechanisms. And we're really hopeful that we can reverse some of the outposts, which are such an infringement on the lives of Palestinian communities in Area C in the West Bank. And the last issue that we're...
Noa, sorry. But yes. So you're saying that under current Israeli law, those outposts are illegal, but yes, the issue has been whether or not there's been appetite. Sorry, I should wait for my video to get spotlighted. The issue has been whether or not there's been appetite to basically prosecute people for those particular outposts.
I mean, clearly there has not been appetite because those outposts have been celebrated by the government and given government resources, but they have not been legalized. So these are illegal outposts. People just came and took over land. And the question of how the next government will reverse that will depend on their motivation. And we're hoping to create some of that motivation through litigation. And the third issue that we are really focused on is the issue of prisoners' rights. There are over 9,000 Palestinian security prisoners held in the Israeli prison system. They are denied visits from the Red Cross. ACRI has submitted an appeal on that. We won, and they're still not being given access, and that's something that we're going to work very hard on in the next government.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Noa. I mean,
I just want to add one more point, is that one of the things that we've learned worldwide is that there's a pendulum that switches. And so one of the goals during, if please God, we have a better government, is that we not only need to have new achievements, but also make sure that they are well-grounded and harder to reverse. So for example, we have been able, through shared work of NIF and many of the grantees, to prevent one of the plans of this government to undermine the role of civil society and the ability of civil society to work. And we're going to try to work both within Israel and with other partners to make sure that these threats become much harder in future governments.
Thank you, Noah. And as you said, I mean, those are 4 big goals. And here at NIF, there's been obviously, I mean, not because we're just self-interested, but obviously the team here and in Israel has spoken a lot about the really intense efforts that have been made to weaken civil society institutions, because obviously there's an awareness that in Israel, your organizations, amongst a sort of broader ecosystem of human rights and civil rights organizations that operate both in Israel and in Palestine, are having their funding arrangements and their loyalties tested. And there's been, on both a legal level, but also on a personal level, that activists are being threatened on the street, that people are coming to their houses and threatening them, and that there's this culture is building to try and make people more afraid to stand up for democracy and human rights in Israel. So you sort of touched on
it's an interesting conundrum, because if we're not being attacked enough, that means we're not annoying the government enough, and that means we're not doing our job. So any day that we're not attacked, there's like, what are we doing wrong? But also these attacks are very hard to handle and very hard to work with, and so it's a very delicate balance of, on the one hand, responding to the attacks, and on the other hand, not submitting to what they are trying to do, which is to divert us from our main focus, which is protecting human rights.
Wow. I mean, what a difficult work report to have. Oh, we had a great week because more staff have been threatened.
Yes.
So you sort of touched on this earlier, and I know you said that you feel in the current climate it doesn't look as likely, but I would like, just for those who haven't heard about, that there have been efforts to suppress either certain parties or certain groups from voting ahead of the election. Would you mind explaining a little bit about what are the risks that might happen? Is it legal? I mean, is it legal? Obviously not. And what recourse is available? So what are the kind of systems that people are preemptively trying to build to limit the chance that there might be election interference?
So election interference can still happen. The issue that we were very worried about was changing the laws of the game ahead of the elections, in terms of changing the law about who is allowed or not allowed to run. And since the Knesset is out of session and the law hasn't progressed, there's a very early bill, but it hasn't been advanced. The threat that the law of elections will be changed in order to disqualify Arab parties, I think that that's less likely at this point. It's not impossible. I mean, if anything, is that we've learned that things that are unprecedented have happened, but it will be less likely at this point that the law will change. It doesn't mean that there are not going to be attempts to disqualify Arab parties. Actually, we had kind of a weird altercation. We at ACRI represent all people, so there are instances where we represent people that we are very much opposed to, both in terms of perpetrators of attacks against Palestinian perpetrators of attacks against Israelis, but also very extreme right-wing elements inside, Jewish elements inside Israel. So in the past weeks, we've been dealing with the attempts of the Shin Bet, the secret police, to disqualify a party that is to the right of Otzma Yehudit, which is a Kahanist, racist party, the most radical party that we've ever seen. So there's now a party to the right of it that wants to run. And the Shin Bet has interfered with the registrar of parties, saying that they have secret evidence based on which they want to disqualify the party. And we at ACRI of course, oppose all the racism of the new party. But we were very worried that if the Shin Bet uses secret evidence to disqualify this party, they will also try and use secret evidence to disqualify other parties, Arab parties, or left-wing Jewish parties, which is why we kind of found ourselves in this very strange alignment with this right-wing party that was eventually allowed to register. The right-wing party may still be disqualified based on open evidence, but at least we haven't, the Supreme Court hasn't justified the use of secret evidence. That doesn't mean that the Shin Bet won't try later to use secret evidence to disqualify Arab parties, and we will be standing against that. Our colleagues at Adala are very concerned about disqualification of Arab parties or Arab candidates. They've been planning for a long time to oppose these efforts, and I'm sure that they will be successful, but I'm also quite certain that there will be attempts to ban Arab parties from running. The law in Israel is very clear that the right to elect and be elected is a very, very basic right. But in every election since 2005, there have been attempts to ban Arab parties through the political process, and these attempts have been reversed in the Supreme Court. And I am guessing and hopeful that this is going to be the route this time as well for the Arab parties. That I'm guessing that the political process will try to disqualify them from running, and I am hopeful that the Supreme Court will overturn that. And all of these things will happen in the next 40 days as the lists to the Knesset are going to be submitted in 40 days from now. And then I think that the Knesset will try to challenge the running of the Arab parties, and then the Supreme Court will have to overturn that. That will happen. That will all happen in early September. After that, there is Election Day, where we're still very worried about interference. We're both worried about the police, which has been taken over by Ben Gvir, threatening voters or trying to intimidate voters or being violent against voters in Arab society. And we're also worried about other gangs and organized violent groups that may attack voters both in Arab society, also and possibly in Jewish society, but more likely in Arab society. And we're worried about a late intervention of the police, and we're trying to gear up to be very, very ready to have immediate responses on Election Day, so we can get to a judge within an hour or within 40 minutes from having any type of report, so that we can restore free and fair elections as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Noa. And for those who are listening at home, I'm sure many of you already know this, but obviously 20% of the population of Israel is Arab Israeli or Palestinian citizens of Israel, but their percentage, they have non-mandatory voting in Israel, unlike Australia. And that means that the percentage of Jewish Israelis that vote is much higher than the percentage of Arab or Palestinian Israelis that vote every year, which means there's often, every year, certain parties say, well, if we got a higher proportion of Arab Israelis or Palestinians voting, then it could shift the power significantly in the Knesset. We'll be having a separate session that kind of dives a little bit more into that in specificity later in the series. But just to sort of paint a picture as to why there's so much incentive in certain elements of the government or on the right to try and limit Arabs showing up at the polls. So thank you, everyone who's already submitted questions so far. I've got one more that I'm going to ask, and then we'll throw open fully to everybody in the Q&A box. So please, for those of you who aren't aware, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little button that says Q&A. So click that and submit any questions you have through there. And we'll combine any that are similar in topic and pass them to Noa. So Noa, I guess not quickly, but you talked a little bit about the judicial overhaul. And I was wondering, your work obviously relies on you working inside legal systems inside of Israel, working with the Israeli courts. Have you noticed what has changed about your work since the kind of most recent judicial overhaul attempts have been parts of them have been successful? Have you noticed a change in the appetite or manner in which your cases in the Knesset are being heard?
So I'm stuck in this very unfortunate position of defending a court system that I'm frustrated with a lot of the time. But what we understand about declining democracy is that you defend the democratic spheres that exist and then you fight to expand them. And you don't give up on them even if they're imperfect. And so the Supreme Court of Israel has always had these two layers. On the one hand, for ACRI and for many other actors, they've been really beacons, amazing beacons of success and courage and human rights in protection of citizens of Israel. And, you know, there are hundreds of examples that we could give to the amazing contribution of the Supreme Court to human rights of citizens of Israel, both Jewish and Palestinian. And on the other hand, the court has rejected so many of the appeals challenging the legality of the occupations, the legality of the settlements, and is doing, in our opinion, too little to protect the rights of Palestinians. And that's been true for decades. It's not Palestinians in the West Bank. And that's been true for decades. It's not new to the overhaul. I actually think, and I've discussed this with colleagues, that since the judicial overhaul, so the judicial overhaul did a few things. On January of 2023, the Minister of Justice, a new Minister of Justice for the government that was just sworn in, stood up and said, I'm going to overhaul the system. And he suggested 6 pieces of legislation that would change the system forever. And it's very interesting to note that since January 2023, the government has had a supermajority in the Knesset and could pass any law that it wanted. But of the 6 laws, 1 passed in 2023 and was overruled by the Supreme Court in a case that ACRI was involved in. Another law, which was changing the nomination system of judges, was mitigated from the original proposal of Levine and passed. And we, in June, had a hearing on the law that has passed, and it would be quite shocking if the judges wouldn't interfere after this kind of hearing. I mean, they were very, very clear in the hearing that they were very concerned about the law. And then there's a third piece of legislation that was passed just in the last couple of weeks, changing the status of the Attorney General, but that will only come into action in January 2027, so it won't impact before the elections. And my strong guess is that the next government will either change the law or we will be able to overturn it in court. So if these big piece of legislation, none of it has passed, which is credit to many different forces that were working against it, but mostly to the Israeli public